This training module covers the terrain system differences between the Load 27-2 and E-2 aircraft. This presentation is Honeywell proprietary information and is subject to export restrictions and is intended for personal use only. This material was developed by the Honeywell Flight Technical Services Organization. For more pilot training and videos, go to pilots.honeywell.com. The Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning System is slightly different between the E-Jets and E-2 aircraft. The E-Jets aircraft contains the Honeywell Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning Module, or EGPWM, which resides in the aircraft's MAU cabinet. On the E-Jets 27-2 aircraft, there are two types of terrain that can be overlaid on the display. The first is the EGPWM terrain, also known as relative terrain, threat terrain, and TAWS. It's overlaid on the lateral map, not on the VSD, and is limited to 320 nautical miles and is shown as red, yellow, and green dots. The map overlay is turned on and off using the terrain radio button on the map drop-down menu. The image is generated from a video or picture bus and is shown here as yellow and red. The EGPWS image can be shown on a black background or the classic MFD format if iNav is not installed. The second type of terrain is topography, which is included with the iNav option and consists of brown and green terrain shading or natural and artificial terrain features of an area. It's turned on and off through the map and plan drop-down menus and selecting the topography checkbox. The image is generated by the display's Advanced Graphics Module, or AGM. This shading also appears on the VSD. To turn on topography, check the topography checkbox on the map drop-down menu. To display EGPWM terrain, select the terrain radio button. Since terrain and weather have the same color palette, they are mutually exclusive on the display. On the Plan drop-down menu, topography can be turned on and off, but the ground prox terrain selection is removed. Note that EGPWM alerts from modes 1 through 7 cannot be turned off, and if a threat terrain alert occurs, the display will auto-change and show threat terrain, green, yellow, and red. The peaks readout on 27-2 aircraft shows one or two elevation numbers that indicate the highest and lowest terrain being displayed. The highest terrain number is displayed first, followed by the lowest terrain number. The highest and lowest peak values are shown in the same color as the terrain color on the display. A single number displays when the screen is black or blue because the aircraft is over water or flat terrain. Amber dashes appear in the peaks field when the display terrain has overflowed the readout field. There is no readout shown when the valid terrain is not available. The on-display terrain messages that appear in the terrain window on the MFD or iNav are shown here. Terrain in green is shown when the terrain is selected for display and no failure conditions exist. Terrain test in white appears when the EGPWM self-test is active. Terrain inhibit appears when the terrain inhibit is active. Terrain NA appears when the terrain awareness is not available due to position accuracy or system degradation. Terrain fail appears when the terrain is selected for display and a failure condition exists. There are also two caution messages, ground prox fail and terrain fail. These messages are covered in the Aircraft QRH and the Honeywell Pilot's Guide. On E-2 aircraft, there are three types of terrain generated for display. The first is topography, which like 27-2 is brown and green shading. The second type of terrain is SA terrain, also known as relative terrain. This terrain overlay is a shaded or muted red, yellow, green image overlaid on top of the topography. The overlay is controlled with an SA terrain checkbox on the map and plan drop-down menus. It originates on the AGM and is drawn by the display software and is limited to a 100 nautical mile range. The third type of terrain is threat terrain, also known as ground prox or TAWS. This overlay is bright, solid red and yellow image on top of the SA terrain. This overlay is drawn automatically by the iNav from the EGPWF or Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning function. It cannot be turned off. Note, if the EGPWF senses a terrain alert and the SA terrain overlay is not turned on, The terrain will automatically pop up on the display. If the SA terrain overlay is already on, the threat terrain will appear as a flashing, solid color patch of terrain with brighter colors on top of the SA terrain. To turn the topography on the E2 aircraft, check the topography checkbox on either the map or plan drop-down menu. To turn situational awareness or relative terrain on or off, select the SA terrain radio button. Note that threat terrain or ground prox terrain is always enabled or turned on and cannot be turned off. If weather has been selected for display and a terrain alert occurs, the weather overlay is automatically turned off and the ground prox terrain image is shown. This image shows the topography turned on, which is the tan and green topographical shading, as well as the SA or relative terrain image. SA terrain or relative terrain is the solid red, yellow, and green overlay and is generated by the electronic display system. When threat terrain is active, the ground prox terrain is automatically turned on and appears as bright, flashing red and yellow sectors. In addition, the half-range ring will automatically adjust to 5 nautical miles as shown here. On E2, when terrain data is available, the highest elevation within the selected range is displayed in white font. This is limited to 100 nautical miles. The elevation is displayed in 100-foot increments with 3 digits, including leading zeros. When terrain is not available, 3 amber dashes replace the elevation readout in the peaks display. A terrain inhibit switch is located on the center pedestal. When pressed, it inhibits both the EGPWF terrain, display and oral alerts, and the SA or relative terrain, red, yellow, green image. Terrain messages appear in the terrain window on the iNav or MFD. They are SA terrain in green, which appears when SA terrain is selected for display and no failure conditions exist. SA terrain fail in amber, when SA terrain is selected for display but not displayed due to a failure in data or if the aircraft is unable to compute present position. SA terrain inhibit in white, which appears when the terrain inhibit button on the center pedestal is pressed. SA terrain off in white, which is shown when the SA terrain is selected but not displayed due to dead reckoning mode or when the weather layer has been selected. There are several terrain warning system CAS messages. These are covered in the Aircraft QRH, the AOM Volume 2, and the Honeywell Pilot Guide. For more information on Honeywell products and services, go to www.honeywell.com.